Greetings. I'm Elaine Duncan, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about the upcoming Tao of Trauma course. This is a year-long course that meets over 5 weekends in the 5 seasons defined by Chinese medicine. It's an integrative study of the self-protective response as defined by Western neurobiology with the 5 elements of Chinese medicine. Its core tenets are rooted in my book, The Tao of Trauma, and there are 4. First, that 2-legged and 4-legged animals go through the same 5 steps in their response to danger. Second, that successful completion of each and all of these 5 steps will mitigate the impact of trauma. Third, that symptoms arise when a step is thwarted or remains incomplete. And fourth, that the particular step that remains incomplete influences how trauma's imprint affects a survivor's tissues, organs, psychological constructs, functional challenges, spiritual longings. These principles grow out of the work of Peter Levine in the somatic experience and experiencing approach to trauma resolution. The curious thing is that these 5 steps are mirrored in the 5 elements of Chinese medicine. So we could say, starting in the lower left corner with the autumn and the metal element, that the first step is to recognize that something is new in our environment. These are like 5 capacities for navigating life, 5 capacities for navigating danger or life threat. The first is we have to be able to recognize that something new is in our environment. And that's the gift of the metal and the lung and the colon in Chinese medicine. The second is we have to have the capacity to distinguish safety from threat. We have to be able to ask for help when we need it. And that's the gift of the winter or the water element in Chinese medicine. The third capacity is our ability to mobilize a response that's commensurate with the level of threat we're experiencing. This is the gift of the spring, the wood element, and the sympathetic nervous system. And the fourth is the summer, the fire element, and our capacity to restore coherence, to know when the threat is over and restore equanimity. This comes from a message from the heart in the heart's beat. And the fifth or the last one is to digest the gristle and harvest the lessons. No matter how successful we were in the previous 4 steps, with managing our arousal and our experience of trauma, there's still some gristle to digest and some lessons to harvest for future experiences of danger. So we can think of the 5 elements as housing these 5 capacities for survival, and we can work with these elements to help survivors restore these capacities. The fortunate thing is that the Taoists, the ancient Taoists, discerned resonant relationships between these 5 elements and 5 emotions, organs, tissues, functional challenges, spiritual longings that can be accessed through the system and the framework of the 5 elements. So when we integrate these correspondences with neurobiology, we can help move survivors to unwind the imprint of either a braced or collapsed state in their body, their mind, their emotions, or their spirit. So let's go through these 5. The first is the metal. It awakens arousal and it helps us cultivate embodied awareness. This is the gift of the spirit of the lung called the Po, embodied awareness, interoception. So we'll be exploring somatic mindfulness, looking for the way that instinctive responses are experienced by our animal-like nature. We'll be looking at global threat and whole body constriction that's managed by the diaphragm system. You will learn skills to restore capacity for curiosity, like this squirrel here is looking pretty curious at their world, and to restore an embodied and secure boundary in the skin. The skin is known as the 3rd lung in Chinese medicine, and how to restore regulation in the diaphragm system after global arousal that happens, that begins with a brace in our respiratory diaphragm and then influences the whole diaphragm system. In the wintertime, we'll gather around the water element and the function to signal threat. The water's job is to signal whole body alarm. We'll explore the polyvagal system, the theory that Stephen Porges has developed, and look at the role of habituated fear on morbidity and mortality, the impact of ancestral trauma and health disparities in marginalized communities. And you'll learn skills to restore a sense of a safe container, capacity to recognize safety and distinguish it from threat in the kidney adrenal system, and regulation in the brainstem structures. Then comes spring. Next spring, we'll look at the wood element, which is essentially the sympathetic nervous system, and our capacity to mobilize a fight or flight response that's commensurate with the level of threat. And we'll explore the impact of thwarted mobilization on chronic pain, on embodied awareness, on habituated anger, and on anxiety. And you'll learn skills to restore proprioception in the sinews, restore capacity to orient to threat, and to restore benevolence as the true nature of the liver and the wood element. Then come next summer, we'll get together to explore the heart of trauma. The fire element is responsible for communication, connection, and we'll look at how equanimity and danger is communicated by the heart. We'll look at social engagement as the foundation for resilience for all of us, cardiac coherence and whole body health, and the physiology that supports connection. You'll learn skills to restore the pericardium's capacity for connection, the infrastructure for that connection that's responsible by the triple burner, triple heater, and the heart's gift of propriety, whole body regulation, the role of the supreme controller in managing our life after trauma. Then in the late summer, the wonderful 5th season that the Chinese define along about next August, we'll explore the function of digesting the gristle. Because no matter how successful we were in going through these previous 4 steps, there will still be some gristle for us to digest. There will still be some lessons for us to harvest. So we'll look at the visceral brain, the belly brain, study the gut biome, explore the impact of developmental trauma on the belly brain and on lifelong health, and look at interoception and the visceral brain, the role of the gut, like I knew it in my guts, that kind of function. And you'll learn skills to restore peristalsis in the guts and vitality in the visceral brain, and our capacity to digest both food and experiences, and to restore vitality in our muscle tissue when it's suffered from either brace or collapse. And that gives us the basis for returning to the metal with a fresh new start. By embodying our survival and the experience of the previous 5 steps, we become more available to engage in a clear and unencumbered approach to a new sense of arousal that awakens us. So the Chinese were wise. They understood that we both inherit information from our parents and our ancestors, but we're also born with a certain constitutional type. And these 5 constitutional types are reflected in the 5 elements and in 5 different responses to danger. So we can't use protocol-driven treatments or think that there's only one way to treat a trauma survivor, because on the one hand, there are 5 different places where our experience of the self-protective response could have gotten thwarted, but there's also a yin aspect and a yang aspect. There's a hyper arousal or yang aspect and a hypo arousal or yin aspect. So by bringing these worlds together and making use of the correspondences of Chinese medicine, we can provide more nuanced diagnosis of trauma survivors and be able to be of more help to them. So the Tao of Trauma is a year-long East meets West exploration of the 5 elements and the 5 steps of the self-protective response. It meets over 5 weekends. It explores 5 elements. It explores 5 steps of the self-protective response and has 3 cohorts. one in Silver Spring, Maryland, one in Ojai, California, and one that will be live streamed and recorded. So we encourage people who are vaccinated against COVID to join us for the in-person classes. And if you're unable to be vaccinated or unable to travel, we encourage you to join us for the live stream recorded class. And that class will also include an optional hour and a half or so questions and reflections opportunity, so that you'll have an opportunity to think these things through a little more closely with me. It couldn't be a more important time in our nation for healers to come forward. This class takes the principles of Chinese medicine, takes them beyond needles and herbs, and applies them in a framework that's accessible not just to acupuncturists, but also to medical providers, somatically oriented mental health providers, and body workers. We'll be using the Tao of Trauma as our text. You will learn interaction, observation, and touch skills. Here's the fee structure. There are 70 CEUs for you coming. And our goal is broad. We work with individuals, but we're healing our culture. And we know from the Centers for Disease Control, their work with adverse childhood experiences, that being consumed by fear in childhood is correlated with alarming rates of adult morbidity and mortality, and influences virtually every public health concern of our times, including obesity, cardiac, pulmonary, immune function, addictions to cigarettes, drugs and alcohol, as well as depression, anxiety, suicidality, and major mental illness. So we have a profound capacity in our fingertips to be of service to all of these issues. We also can touch the dynamics of social intelligence, or the lack thereof, because an unfettered flight or fight response that is not mitigated by a capacity for relationship, safety and connection are our primary tools that will mitigate it. If we don't have capacity in our heart space, in our ventral vagus nerve, in our Shen, to mitigate this fight or flight energy, we are at risk for being unable to distinguish I'm unsafe from I'm uncomfortable. We're at risk for responding impulsively, potentially with violent words or violent actions. So couldn't be more important. Our communities need their healers. We are rooted in a spirit of cultural transformation through healing. So if you are BIPOC, LGBTQ, or a first-generation immigrant, we invite you to take 25% off all course fees. And I want to tell you, this is from Harriet Benefold and Ephraim Korngold, Between Heaven and Earth. This is what we're about. What is good for nature is good for humanity. What is good for one is good for all. What is good for the mind is good for the body. To harm a part is to harm the whole. What is bad for the heart is bad for the body. What damages one person damages all people. What injures the earth injures me. Conversely, to restore and preserve the good health of one body and mind is to foster the well-being of the whole, the earth, and all life upon it. Please feel welcome. The Tao of Trauma.